Good afternoon. My name is Yu Xie, Professor of Sociology and Director of Paul and Marshall Weisman Center on Contemporary China. Today, I'm very pleased to introduce Jianguo Jack Liu, who is Rachel Carson University Distinguished Professor of Fisheries and Wildlife at the Michigan State University, and also serves as a Director of the Center for Systems Integration and Sustainability. I've known Jack for about 20 years now. As many of you know, I was at University of Michigan, Ann Arbor for 26 years, and Jack has been teaching around the same time at Michigan State University, which was only, 70 miles away from Ann Arbor. I'm a demographer studying human populations. Jack is also a demographer, not only studying human populations, but also panda populations. In fact, he studies the integration and interaction between humans and pandas in Sichuan, among many other things. You will hear his latest research. But he's known for his work in panda populations in China. Jack has published widely in many science journals, including Nature and Science, multiple pieces in each. His work contributes to our understanding as to how to preserve the environment and develop with sustainability. For his scholarly contributions, he has been recently elected as a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and also a fellow of American Philosophical Society. Today, Jack is giving the inaugural lecture on environment in China. This is the first one. China's environment on a Metacoupled planet. He will explain to you what that means. Please join me in welcoming Jack to give the lecture.
Thank you so much. It's really my great pleasure to be here. And thanks you and Mike for inviting me here. And it's great to see some old friends and to meet more new friends. I was actually on sabbatical here about almost 10 years ago in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology with Simon Levin. And he is on the way back from Europe, and I will have a meeting with him tomorrow. So it's really my honor and pleasure to talk with you about some of the research that my collaborators and I have been doing in the last quarter centuries. And so I will explain some of the terminology here, and I know some of the terms are new, and but I feel it is, let me see, trying to, let's see, explain what's really happening in the world, not just the socio-economic connection among different parts of the world, but also the environment connections. Increasingly, there are more and more environmental connections. Not just both of them separately, but both of them simultaneously. I think that's something that we trying to use a new term, Metacoupled planet, to explain those kind of complex interactions between humans and the natural systems. And, oh, it's not. Yeah, it's working. It's working. Yeah, okay, great. Thank you so much for your patience. And sometimes the technical issues are harder to deal with, but you try different ways and you work out in the end, hopefully. So here you see a red China. Not the political red, but the environmental red here. And what we can see here within China, the interaction, human-environment interaction within China. And we use coupled just like a husband and wife, the intimate relationship between humans and the environment, right? So China not just to have interaction within China, but also have interaction with some adjacent countries, right? And also with this adjacent countries like Russia and Japan and India, those countries, but also with distant countries like the US, for example, right? So these kind of interactions are important to understand, and also how those different interactions interact, how the internal interaction affect the long-distance interactions, how the long-distance interaction affect the interaction between neighboring countries, right? So all this, just to use China as an example. You can use other countries as an example, US and other countries as an example. So every place has interaction within the system, also between the system and other systems, adjacent or distant. Right? So this is what the meta means. Metacoupled means social economic interactions and environment interactions across different places. Right. So you and Mike suggested me to talk about a little bit overview of China's environment issue, because this is the first lecture in this new wonderful series that you initiated here. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm also going to focus on a topic that my colleagues and I have been working on for 22 years, Pandas, people, and policies. And we use this as a lens to understand China's environment issues, also to understand the world environment issues. Yeah, we're okay now. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And then make some suggestions for revolutionizing China's environment protection. Right? So we're not talking about political revolution, we're talking about environment revolution. And first, I'd like to share with you some overall trend. And here is a diagram comparing air pollution PM 2.5, the particular matter less than 2.5 micrometers range, and between China and the world. Right? You can see here, China always have a higher concentration, right, compared to the world average over time since '95. And then in the recent years, the gap between China and the world average is getting smaller for two reasons. It seems like the rest of the world actually is getting worse, like countries in India, and the air pollution also getting worse. And China has slight decline in terms of the PM 2.5 concentration. Right? And another issue is actually more important than air. Bad air is everybody know from the sky. If you cannot see anything, you can see that's the air problem. But water, a lot of water is underground. We don't see them. But a lot of wastewater released in China. Over time, it has been increasing over time. But the good news is that the treatment of those wastewater from industry, from other sources, has been increasing. So in some places, actually, water quality has been improving. Right? Another thing that we have been doing with my colleague in the Chinese Academy of Sciences is to assess the changes in ecosystem services. And these ecosystem services are the benefit that ecosystem provide to humans. And like food production, carbon sequestration, and soil retention, which is important for many reasons, and the thunderstorm prevention and water retention and flood mitigation, all increased in China from 2000 to 2010. The only decline that we observe is the habitat for biodiversity. China is rich in biodiversity, actually is one of the main biodiversity hotspot countries. But the biodiversity is still declining. Right? And also climate change is a big issue in China. The temperature rise about 0.2 to 0.3 degrees in northern part of China per decade. In southern part of China is about 0.1 degree, and in the past 5 decades. And the sea level rise about 1 centimeter to 2.5 centimeters per decades. And then also increased extreme events like big floods and glacier in China, in the Tibet plateau have been reducing, by about 37% between 1989 to 2014. Another reason for this kind of happen, China is contributing to climate change is through CO2 emission and energy consumption. And as you can see, the CO2 emission and energy consumption has been increasing exponentially. And there are many factors affecting China's environment. There are demographic factors and cultural, political, institutional, and technology and social economic. Also, there are some natural factors like geological reasons. But they are all related to human interactions within China as well as human-nature interaction between China and other countries, far away or nearby. Right? So I'm going to share a few slides about this population increase, everybody knows. GDP increase, everybody knows. Now China is the second largest economy in the world. And then urbanization is also continuing. And the government has been pushing for more urbanization. Now more people live in the cities now than in the rural areas. And also, the government has put out a lot of policies, a lot of investment related to air quality, climate, and water quality and shortage issues. So as you know, many of you know that in 2014, President Xi declared that a war on air pollution, right? And then reduced the PM 2.5 concentration by 15 to 33% in the most affected region relative to 2012. And also to cut carbon intensity by 40 to 45% by 2020 from the year 2005 level. And then the estimated cost of this action plan for air pollution control alone will costed about 1.7 trillion yuan during 2013 and 2017. So now, according to the exchange rate, $1 equal to about 6.9 yuan. And then investment in water is even bigger, 4 trillion yuan between 2011 and 2020. Right? And those kind of issues are important. Also, there are a lot of larger conservation programs. I'm going to highlight just 2 of them. One is called Natural Forest Conservation Program. Another is called Green to Green Program. This program, actually, they have been working on those programs too. And the Natural Forest Conservation Program is to protect the natural forest and ban the illegal logging and so on and so forth. The Green to Green Program is to retain the cropland on steep slopes to forest or grassland. Right? And those 2 programs are nationwide. Here, different color indicate the distribution of those 2 programs. The green color indicate those provinces have both programs. And the yellow one indicate those provinces only have one, the green to green program. And then the other, a few provinces have no programs for this. And those programs provide a lot of investment subsidies to the farmers and the forest industry. Right? So here is the cumulative amount of investment in these 2 programs. As you can see, since 1998 and 1999, and this investment for the GTGP has reached 350 billion yuan. And for the Natural Forest Conservation Program had reached about 250 billion yuan. Right. And another important factor is the nature reserve system in China has increased dramatically. Now it has about 2,750 nature reserves nationwide. It accounts for about 15% of the territory in China. Actually, this is about the average of the nature reserve around the world. And so far we talk about what's happening in China. But as you know, China has a lot of interactions with other countries. The trade is a big one. And both imports and exports in terms of the value has increased exponentially. And there was some drop recent years, but one thing to know is that the export is always larger than the imports. And not just the trade increased so much, but also foreign investment has increased dramatically too over the years since 1980s. And that's something that a lot of people know. China attracts a lot of foreign investment. But one thing that actually was a surprise when we were producing this paper, we found out the overseas investment from China in other countries has actually exceeded the investment from other countries in China. So if you compare these two curves here, and this is actually much larger now than what China attracts foreign investment in. So all this have important implications environmentally. And the investment could bring more advanced technology, sometimes also bring outdated technology, create a lot of pollutions. And the trade also cause a lot of issues too. So those kind of relationship has environmental consequences that we usually don't pay a lot of attention to it. Right? So there are a lot of consequences of environmental problems. And here I just gave some examples here. There are so many different studies on this. So in terms of economic loss, it accounts for about 7 to 20% of GDP in the past 2 decades, right? Including the cost from environmental pollution for the ecological damage. Also impact on the human health. Probably some of you have read the premature mortality related to PM 2.5 in China in 161 kind of cities account for more than 652,000 deaths, or close to 7% of the total deaths in 2015. Right? Also, the average life expectancy approximately 5.5 years shorter in northern part of China due to the air pollution. This actually really sent a wake-up call to people because, I cannot live that long anymore. So those kind of consequences really get people's attention. And then also the high lead level in blood and also endangered children's mental development. Right? And also the impact on daily life. There are about 900 million people in China are under severe water shortages, at least 1 month a year. That's really incredible. And also about 300 million farmers have no access to safe, clean drinking water. Right? And also China has impact on other countries too, and not just other countries on China. The largest emitter of CO2, as we mentioned earlier, but on average, per person, the CO2 emission in China is still much lower than many developed countries like the US. Right? And the air pollutants in China also affect other countries like Japan, Korea, and also US and Canada, those distant countries, that not just the neighboring countries like Japan and Korea. And the deforestation due to China's timber demand. So earlier I mentioned this Natural Forest Conservation Program, which is great to protect the forest in China, but the demand for timber in China is still increasing. So where the timber come from? A lot of timber come from other countries, including tropical rainforest country. So we did a rough estimate, and based on the amount of timber, about 129 million cubic meters during 1994 and 2011. And based on the how much timber each hectare can produce, we estimate that about China avoided the loss of 7.4 million hectares of forest from harvesting. So that's a huge amount. Right? So those are just some examples about how China and other countries affect each other, not just socio-economically, but also environmentally. Right? Now I'm going to switch the gear to use Pandas, people, and policy as a laboratory for us to study China's environment issues. We use this as a laboratory because it gives us the opportunity to generate ideas, to develop methods. Then we can apply these methods and these ideas to address other environmental issues in other parts of China and actually some other parts of the world too. Right? So, as you know, pandas are global environment icons, right? But the distribution range has been reduced a lot. Historically, the wide range in South China and Southwest of China. But now the current distribution range is this much, the red color here. Okay? So now if this is an inset, you can see in 3 provinces, including Sichuan that you mentioned earlier. And so those kind of decline in distribution is direct impact from the human activities. And traditionally, before we started our work, a lot of biologists have done excellent work on panda biology. So how many pandas a mom panda can have, how many baby pandas a mom pandas can have, for example, the reproductive success. And how much panda eat in terms of bamboo, right? When do they eat and so on. So those are very important issues. But focus on the habitat conditions. Bamboo as the staple food for the pandas. Forest as cover, and the pandas also like gentle slope areas because they can move easily, just like people. You know, if you go into the steep slope, it's harder to move. And then they usually distributed in area with elevation less than 3,750 meters. But the most critical issue is the human impact. Humans compete with pandas in terms of their areas. And humans cut down the forest habitat for the pandas for timber, for fuelwood, for other non-timber products, right? Like Chinese herbal medicine, for example. They're collecting herbal medicine in the forest and they cause disturbance to panda habitat. Also, more dramatically is to convert panda habitat into human use, like agricultural land and residential land or tourism facilities and so on and so forth. So without working on those most critical issues, then we may miss the boat to conserve the pandas. So for us, there are 2 major goals for our study. One is to really understand the complex interaction between pandas and people. Okay? Another thing is to apply the results to panda conservation. So those are the 2 goals for our research team. And we chose one of the panda reserve as our long-term laboratory. You know, a lot of people have a laboratory in the room. We have a laboratory under the sky. So it's a lot of fun actually to do the field work there. And this nature reserve is a flagship reserve in the sense that it attracts a lot of attention, not just inside China, but also internationally. It received enormous, exceptional financial and technical support from the Chinese government and also from international organizations like WWF. Right? And it was established in 1975 and is one of the largest nature reserves for the pandas. and about 200,000 hectares. And they had about 10% of the wild pandas there. But also, they have about more than 5,000 local residents in it. So this is different. And in the US and many other developed countries, there are no people, no resident inside the reserve. But in China, most of the nature reserve have local people in it. So actually, this is a representation of the nature reserve in China, because those reserves were established after people have been living there for centuries, and then it's really difficult for people to move out. And these different colors indicate the elevation level, right? From about 1,200 meters to more than 6,000 meters. Right? So we have been using this as the laboratory. We developed a conceptual framework to understand the complex relationship between people, have local people, social economic conditions, their activities, and the distribution, and at the individual level, also at the household level, the community level. And then we also work on those the natural factors, like the hydrological and geographical factors, and the forest composition, the structure, and the distribution, and the size, and panda habitat, and panda behavior, and so on and so forth. So those are interrelated. If the panda habitat or panda change, that prompt the government to develop new policies. And those policies change will affect people. People have different response to the policies. And then we'll have a kind of another feedback loops for the interaction between people and pandas and the habitat and the policies, right, and policymakers. So we use different methods to collect data, and face-to-face interview, and field sampling, and also use government document, and widely use the remote sensing data. Right? Once we got the data, we manage the data in a lot of software programs that many of you are familiar with, the relational database and the remote sensing software program and geographic information system. Then we integrate them, use computer modeling to understand the relationship, also to project what will happen in the future. And then we really do a systematically integration. What we mean system integration? We mean integrate different disciplines, integrate different components of the systems, including human components, natural components, also integrate them over time, across space, among different organization level. Right? So this is basically to illustrate different degree of integration. In the beginning, we have low degree of integration. Now we increase the integration over time. And now I'm going to show you one result, one main result. Right? So this result shows that the panda habitat has, this is a highly suitable habitat for the pandas in the reserve, and then actually has declined faster after the reserve was established. Right? So if you see here, this is the time 75 when the reserve was established. You see there were a little bit decline in the habitat, but compared to the slope after the reserve was established, you see the big difference, right? So people may say, why? We were surprised when we see this result. We ask why this happened. And we see here, one is the human population size in the reserve has increased by more than 67% over time. Right? Here I use the starting time when the reserve was established to 2005, 2006, because that's the time that we trying to understand what happened there. Right? So, and then the number of households actually increased even faster by more than 120%. So I will talk about this issue a little bit later, why the number of households increased faster than number of people. Because when we talk about the environmental impact, we tend to talk about global population size and how many people in the area. But we did not pay much attention to the number of households. Right? But actually, household is more important in the sense that households are the basic unit of production in many areas, consumption for many things. Right? And then when you have so many people, so many households, and there are a lot of activities. Most of the people in the reserve are farmers. So you see the farmlands everywhere. In some area, even near the top of the mountain, you see. Here is a highway cut the reserve into 2 parts. Right? And then there are also other activities like house construction, road construction, hydropower plants over the river, and then grazing. Right? And then also fuel consumption. Fuel was the major energy source for the local people to cook food for humans, also cook food for pigs. And because pigs in that region, people believe they can grow better if they eat cooked food. Right? Because the place was very cold in the wintertime. The elevation is very high. And also in the wintertime, people use fuel wood to heat up the houses. Right? So they consume a lot of fuel wood. So as a result, you can see a lot of areas are gone in the forest. Right? So through the field work, through remote sensing analysis, and through the understanding of the socio-economic conditions, and we were able to explain the reasons why. But the government did not respond that way in the beginning. Right? So when they saw this report, because it was published in Science, got a lot of news media, even the president of China knew about this, as Pandas as the national treasure of China. So a lot of attention. No. And then first, they just did not believe it, did not believe the results. And they said this is impossible because we spend so much time, so much effort, so much resources on panda conservation. And you are saying the habitat is getting worse or even much worse than before. So they did not even allow us to do research there for almost a year. And that was tough because a couple of my students doing their dissertation there. So without working there, it's hard to do. So that took a lot of time for the government to investigate. And then finally they confirmed what we reported. Then that was a big change, 180 degrees of change. And they said, well, you found problems, now we'd like you to help us find solutions. Right? So that's a big change. And one of the change was one of the co-authors for this paper was asked to be replace the former director of the reserve. Okay? So, and then he began to implement some new conservation policies. Right? So one of the policy is natural forest conservation program. Here it was implemented in 2001 to prevent the illegal harvesting. Here the household in the reserve was assigned to monitor the forest. Then those gray areas, are the forest parcels assigned to the household for monitoring. If they do a good job, then they get 900 yuan subsidies. 900 yuan may seem small to us here, but it was about 20% of the household income at that time. So it's quite substantial. So then the other areas are monitored by the reserve staff members. So we did some research to find out the effectiveness of this monitoring. We compare the percentage of tree harvested in this time period. So here you can see the percentage was really low. Actually, among the household monitored parcels, it was a little bit smaller than the parcels monitored by the staff members. So that means the illegal harvest was very small amount. Another policy the reserve implemented started in 2002 was to build a Eco-Hydropower Plant. In the past, the reserve also had several hydropower plants, but they sold the electricity to the people in the cities. So the farmers in the reserve could not afford it. And now this new Eco-Hydropower Plant is to provide cheap electricity for the resident, right, to reduce the fuel wood consumption. So we also did some follow-up study, and then the fuel wood consumption did decrease. Right? About 67% reduction for cooking human food, and 37% reduction for heating, and about 20% reduction for cooking pig fodder. Right? So overall, about 36 reduction in fuel wood consumption. So,
What did they use instead?
Electricity. Electricity, they build this Eco-Hydropower Plant, so they can use more electricity to cook food and or even heat up in the winter time. Yeah. And because the price was so low, so the more households can afford them. Right. So far I talk about what's happening inside the reserve. And also I'm going to show you some examples of human-nature interactions between the reserve and the rest of the world. Right? So there are things going out, there are also things that come in. Right? So those are kind of interactions. And one of the interactions is between Wolong and the adjacent areas. And Wolong is here, so there are some girls in the nearby counties get married with boys inside the reserve because the life quality inside the reserve is relatively higher than the adjacent counties. So you increase the number of people inside the reserve. But also some people outside of the reserve come to the reserve to collect fuel wood and other things too. And also the pandas do not recognize the boundary of nature reserve. Actually, there is no fence around the reserve, so some of the pandas also go out of the nature reserve too. And some may come back again. Right? So there are a lot of interactions here. But also, the government is trying to move people out because they say, well, to reduce the human impact, we need to have fewer people in it. So they are trying to do that, but a lot of people did not take that offer. And some people took the offer to move out, and then many of them moved back again because they could not get used to outside the environment, or sometimes the promise was not delivered, and so they moved back. So then the government and the World Food Program is part of United Nations Agriculture and Food Organization. And they say, well, okay, you don't want to move out? Okay, we build a large apartment complex within the reserve, but in an area which has far away from the habitat, core area of that for the habitat. Right? So also the apartment is for free to the local farmers. Guess how many people moved to the apartment? 0. So why people did not want to take the free apartment? So as I mentioned earlier, most people in the reserve are farmers. What do farmers need? Land, right? Without the land, they cannot survive. You cannot just stay in the apartment every day, breathe the air. Without food, you cannot do anything, right? So what we proposed after interview with the local people and the young people as well, we say, well, let's improve the school education to help children in the reserve to go to college or technical schools. Once they go to college, they will not come back, right? Right? So that's, I think, a strategy that we propose after interview, because that demonstrates the importance of social science research. Because originally, the government did make the decisions and implement policy. They say, well, this is good intention. They have good intention, but the consequence was not good. They did not do this kind of social science research. We did. We interviewed people and found out what they concern, why they don't want to move out, for example. And then we saw several benefits of going to college for students. One is economically efficient, because when the government is trying to provide economic subsidies for the whole household to move, it costs a lot of money. Here, you just improve the school education, then it's less economic cost to the government. Right? Another thing is socially acceptable. You're not forcing people to move out. Actually, in China, as many of you know, if your children can go to college, your parents, grandparents are very proud of you, right? And then they may also move out of the reserve with you once you find jobs in the cities, and then so that's more socially acceptable. Another thing is more ecologically effective. Why? Because those children move out, they will not have children anymore in the reserve, right? The people left behind are too old to have children, right? So over time, you have fewer and fewer people inside the reserve. Even for those young, old people stay inside the reserve, they are too old, they cannot carry out this heavy duty work in the high mountains to cut down the trees and so on and so forth. So the children or grandchildren have to send money back home for them to buy electricity to use instead of cutting down fuel wood. Right? So those are the things that we did a lot of simulations, and we made those kind of projections here. Due to time constraint, I did not show the specific numbers. We have a lot of those. Another kind of connection is that the panda reserve not just have wild pandas, but also had a breeding site, breeding facilities to produce a lot of baby pandas. One year they had 16 baby pandas. Magically, all survived. So that breeding program was very successful. So now they got more than 100 pandas in the breeding facilities. What to do with it? So one way to do it is to send those pandas to zoos around the world, right? So, but not for free, but with some money involved. Usually for panda loans, right? For usually it's about 10 years contract, and each year a pair of panda will cost $1 million for those zoos in other countries to borrow the pandas for some years. And here, the number of pandas outside of the Wolong reserve in the zoos increased, from about less than 20 in 1999 to 85 in 2000. And here, this is a picture was taken when the pandas from Wolong to Washington Zoo, when President Clinton was still the president, and he took his daughter, Chelsea, to see the pandas, and when the pandas arrived in Washington Zoo. Right? So very popular for this kind of activities. And here are the location of the pandas from Wolong, and within China and also in some other countries. And the size of the dot means the different number of pandas. The larger, the more pandas there. So not just the pandas going out, but also a lot of tourists come in to the reserve and to take pictures with the pandas. How many of you have taken pictures with the pandas? Oh, okay, a few of them, yeah. So when you go there, next time, I'd be happy to make arrangement. So for tourists to see the pandas and also see the landscapes, and they buy some local products, right? And also hiking in the mountains. And the number of tourists increased a lot, since 1980. And then in 2008, it suddenly stopped. Why? There was a huge earthquake in the area, what we call the Wenchuan earthquake. So basically the road was damaged and repaired again and again, damaged again and again, okay? So finally, just recently, they had a new strategy, dig the tunnel through the mountains. Now the landslide will not affect the transport and between Wolong and outside of the world. So more tourists are expected to go into the reserve. And those are the places where the tourists come from based on our interview with about 1,200 tourists. We asked them where they come from. Here are the locations from around the world except Africa. Right? And then also the farmers sell products to this market outside of the reserve. And then, so actually the amount has increased over time. And then also to produce agricultural products, they have to buy some industrial product, like pesticides and fertilizer and so on and so forth. And here, the amount of fertilizer also increased over time. So as a result of those kind of interactions within the reserve and between the reserve and outside of the world. So you see here the recovery of the panda. So earlier you see this part from here to here. Now I'm going to show you here the rate is increasing of the panda. Panda recovery started in 2001, okay, when those policies begin to implement and other things began contribute to those kind of recovery. So that's great news, right? So this is just the example from one nature reserve that we have done long-term research. Then we say, well, what happened in other places for the pandas? And then, so my colleagues and I did a recent study, and we found similar patterns. Before 2001, the habitat amount of habitat, this is across the whole entire distribution range, okay? The 3 provinces have pandas now, so we use remote sensing data, use some ground truthing data to map the changes. So from the 76, you can see here the declining, and then in 2001 began to implement. Because after that paper was published, and after the government confirmed our result, then they made some changes. Besides what I shall talk about earlier, they also asked my collaborator in the Chinese Academy of Sciences to develop a new nationwide panda conservation plan. So I was asked to be an advisor to the effort. So we visited many more nature reserves for the pandas, and they developed a plan the government began to implement. So those are the results of those kind of policy, new effort, okay? And also to have some impact from other factors as well. So this is the good news. And the more exciting news that in 2016, the pandas was delisted from the endangered species list. And to be more specific, the pandas had been downgraded from endangered status to threatened status. That means there was less risk for them to become extinct. So that means the habitat has been increasing, the population size has been increasing, and then so the IUCN decided the conservation organization, International Union of Conservation for Nature, that's the organization listed those species, right? So they decided to delist that species. But we all know there's still some risk there. One of the risks is fragmentation of habitat due to road construction and other issues. So recently, the government is developing a new, bigger plan called the Giant Panda National Park. Okay? So you all know US has this wonderful national park system. China is beginning to do that. And they have 10 pilot area for national parks. So one of the pilot study area is Giant Panda National Park, right? So the purpose of this national park is to protect and restore the panda habitat, and also increase habitat connectivity, and then protect 8,000 other plant and animal species, because there are many other species in the panda range. Right? So panda serve as an umbrella species. If we can protect the habitat for the pandas, other species may also have co-benefit from that. Right? So where? So basically it's across the whole current distribution range in 3 provinces, including the 67 existing nature reserves for pandas. Right? And in terms of size, it's about more than 27 square kilometers. It's about 3 times as large as the Yellowstone National Park. Actually, it's a little bit bigger than the state of New Jersey. Right? So if you want to make comparison to that. So this is a big effort, and the cost about 10 billion yuan. Right? It's about 1.5 billion US dollars just for Sichuan province. So Sichuan, because it has about 80% of pandas, so they are taking the lead on this, and there may be more money poured in for the other 2 provinces. Right? So the hope is to complete this park system development by year 2023. Right? So there are a lot of ongoing effort for this. And right? So now we have to talk about the overview of environment issues in China, talk about this example that we have been doing long research there. So both there some successes over there. And so one thing I'd like to offer in the end is to provide some suggestions for revolutionizing China's environment protection. Right? Actually, this is not a new concept. In 2008, Jared Diamond and I published a paper in Science. We use this title called Revolutionize China's Environment Protection. Now, 10 years later, what has China done? And how our suggestions failed or succeeded. Right? So I'd like to show you some of the things that we talk about. One is reforming the administrative systems, which is particularly important in China because it's a top-down, centralized structure of governance. Right? So one thing we suggest is to use environment performance as a major criteria besides the economic performance to select and promote government officials. In the past, so the government in China mainly promote government leaders based on what the GDP growth rate was, without paying attention to environment impact. So we propose that, and then now actually, and the government has been implementing these suggestions. And then, so in some area, if you have bad environment performance, you cannot get promoted. Actually, you will get demoted. Right? So that's a good step towards the right direction. The second suggestion, we say, well, we need to give more power and more resources to environment protection agencies to implement and enforce environment laws and regulations. China has more than 100 environmental laws and regulations, but the most important thing is how to implement them. The Environment Protection Agency had no enough resources to do that. So fortunately, now the ministry has really get promoted. First, it's called the State Environment Protection Administration. It's below ministry level. Okay? Then they changed the name to Ministry of Environment, right? But still not powerful enough. Just recently in March, they changed the name again to give the agency, the new name is Ministry of Ecology and Environment. So now the agency has more resources, has more power to implement those policies and the laws. Another suggestion that we had said, well, we need an organization at national level to coordinate the different agencies for environment protection and development. Because there are many agencies in China. Even for environment-related agencies, there are 10 or even more. State Forestry Administration, Department of Ministry of Land, Ministry of Oceans, and so on and so forth, agriculture, and so on and so forth. So we need an organization to coordinate. So they begin to take steps towards that direction, but still not strong enough yet. Right? We need more power to coordinate those agencies. Another major suggestion we made was to change the development model. In the past, development is a priority. Pollution will come later. We can control pollution later. We can deal with that later. But we say, well, we need to first change the attitude to the environment, not just abuse them or use them forever. There is a limit for that, right? And then also to evaluate the social, economic, and health impact of those environmental problems. Because when people know those environmental problems have impact on their health, they will pay more attention. Then we just say, a lot of environmentalists just say, well, this is not good for the environment. We needed to pay attention to what people care about. And then with those more impact on health and social economic conditions, results show up in the media and the people begin to recognize those. And they also apply more market tools and provide incentives or punishment, and we need to increase the amount of punishment and rather than just the token punishment, right? And also pay attention not just to the population size, but also the household size, the numbers, and the consumption. That's very important. And also encourage the foreign enterprises in China and the government to help China and protect the environment. I think that's very important because they can provide advanced environment-friendly technologies and also other important information for the environment protection. Right? So those are what we said before. And of course, some other people also said something. We cannot claim all the credit for this, right? But at least we participated, we contribute to this. And when our paper was published, it was translated into Chinese and distributed to top leaders of the government. And even the reporter wrote an internal report for those top leaders. So I think that was hopeful to begin to think about this issue and implement some of these. So the new suggestion I have here, three. One is to continue and expand the ongoing effort for environmental recovery and sustainability in China. So that's very important. So we are not done yet because we have some success, but we still have a long way to go. And to prevent, reduce, and compensate for China's environmental impact on other countries. This is something that we did not say anything at that time, because at that time China was still mainly a receiving side. Now China is investing more and more in other countries, and I think that's very important. And also help environment protection in other countries for a sustainable Metacoupled planet. So you notice the red China now become green China, and that's our hope in the future, right? So environmentally green, right? So finally, I'd like just to quickly summarize what we talked about. One is China's overall environment had been getting worse until recently, and many aspects are still below national and international standards. Right? Secondly, is China's environment is affected by many factors related to human-nature interaction within China, as well as between China and the neighboring country and distant countries. And thirdly, China's environmental problems have caused huge socioeconomic losses and the health costs as well in China and also in some other countries. And finally, we need to continue expand the environmental revolution and to fundamentally improve China's environment, right? And also to reduce and compensate environment impact on the other country. Sometimes the impact cannot be avoided. Then we can do something to compensate the cost, right? The impact. And finally, to help environment protection in other countries. So this is a diagram showing how the world are connected through both socio-economic and environment mechanisms. And finally, I'd like to thank a lot of people who helped me and the funding agencies to support the effort. And then for some students who like to read more, and here are several papers, and including one still impressed. So you are the first group that I shared some of the results from these impressed papers, right? And so thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and attention.
Time for questions.
Yeah.
You want to take questions? You want me to take questions?
Either way, you decide.
Okay, I'll take questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, China is in green now, but I know Southeast Asia is in red now. I'm doing this project is in certain there. Yeah, in Thailand, for example, we published a Nature Geoscience paper in South Asia. We found that the deforestation rate is the fastest in South Asia now compared to other regions than China. China is more reforestation, but now. So now we are facing the same problem as yours in Wolong. That we found that the mountain, they set up more and more national forest park, but the deforestation rate is increasing yearly by year. It's much higher than before, every year increase. So now we are thinking about hydropower too. But they said the farmers, they don't like, not farmer, NGO, they don't like hydropower.
Rephrase the question.
Yeah, may you give us more insight into how Eco-Hydropower Plant, where to build, and are they within the park or outside park, and how the transmission, how to transmit the power, the electricity from the other region to the park.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Eco-Hydropower Plant actually was built inside the nature reserve.
Yeah.
So there are two rivers, and small rivers, relatively speaking, not compared to the Three Gorges Dam that you all know about it. So they built this hydropower plant within the reserve, and the government provide all the facilities to transport the electricity to each household. And then that's important, right? And also make sure they're reliable, because sometimes the water level is not stable. So they also connect with the other power grid, and so that when the electricity generated inside the Wolong reserve was not strong enough or was not stable enough, they can get the electricity from other sources. So I think that's very helpful, because besides the price, the farmers also care about reliability. If you say, well, today I have electricity, tomorrow I don't, then they will not use it, right? So I think that's important, yeah.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. I'm a historian and I don't know too much about this topic, but you focused most of your talk on the case of the pandas.
Yeah.
And you know, as you said, the pandas are sort of a special case because they're a national treasure and you can export them. Yeah. But to what extent do you think the pandas are a special case, and to what extent do you think it is generalizable and applicable to maintaining other endangered species?
Yeah, so that's good, very good question. So there are a lot of similarities, also there are a lot of differences. So we recognize that, and in terms of differences, I will talk about that, the difference first. Because of the special status of the pandas, they get more attention, right? So we try to use this special opportunity to get government and the public attention. Because if you work on a small little insect, nobody will care about it. So that's why it's important, right? Yeah. So I think that's important, but they also share a lot of similarities. And actually the methods that we used to compare the changes in the panda habitat have been widely used worldwide in evaluating the changes in other protected areas and in other continents, in other countries. So the methods are basically the same. You compare the changes before and after, also compare the changes outside of the reserve and within the reserve, then you can have more fair comparisons. And then also the human needs are actually surprisingly similar. People need to eat, people need to have fuel or energy, right? And then those are the two important things, water too. So you got to have those kind of basic conditions to meet the people's needs. So a lot of places, people everywhere need at least those three things, right? So I think that's a lot of similarities too.
I will call on Professor Zhou, but next one should be a woman, so get ready. I will change the gender next.
Well, if our students go to Sichuan to do the environmental studies, what kind of censorship will they encounter?
Well, depends on what you do research. Right? I have a student doing, actually American student who speaks Chinese. Actually, I was talking with you, and one student still there. He has been spending 10 months there now, and on Fulbright scholarship. And another student now, she is a faculty member, and she went to Wolong 13 times during her PhD and master program there. So, people are very friendly to them. And my former student said, she had too much food during the Spring Festival because everybody wanted to invite her to celebrate Spring Festival. So she just tasted a little bit in each household. And for the government, I think because it's a little bit far from the Beijing, so it's more protected by the local collaborators and local people. So as long as you don't say political revolution, it's fine, right? And actually, the people there mostly are minorities, Tibetans, and those people are wonderful. And they try to invite us for meals and dinner and lunch. We say no, because we try to understand how fuel wood consumption affect the habitat. If we participate in the dinner, then we increase the amount of fuel consumption. That will bias our data. Yeah. So I think.
Can you publish your critical findings freely?
Yeah, I could. My collaborators in China could not. I can tell you. That's the advantage to be in the U.S. You know, the paper I mentioned earlier in 2001, the science paper, and get a lot of media attention, and the several government officials were fired, and because of that, and so there were a lot of resistance. And at that time, people even doubt the use of remote sensing data. They say, well, this remote sensing data are confidential. Actually, it's open data. They did not know that. They're just trying to use this as an excuse to, downplay the importance of what we do. And now, a new generation of government officials are more knowledgeable, and actually are more much easier to work with. Now I got another project working with collaborators. This is much bigger than Panda research, actually. Those nationwide ecosystem service programs. And this is the paper that I mentioned in 2016, published in Science, was the first one. We are doing several other pieces now. And it's a national ecosystem assessment. And basically to try to find out what kind of positive change has happened, what kind of negative change has happened. It is supported by the Chinese Academy of Sciences and also the Ministry of Ecology and Environment. So I think in many aspects, so we have the advantage of say something more critical than our colleagues in China. So understandably, so we're trying to use those opportunities to promote the environment protection in China. I think in the end, it's for everybody and in China, not just the government officials, but also the general public.
Okay, there's one. Go ahead.
There's a woman. I was wondering, with the attempt to move people to apartments and that kind of, did not fulfill the purpose, did they try giving people land around the apartments or maybe farms around the apartments, meaning attached to them?
Yeah, so they tried, but there was not enough land around the apartment because the topography was very complex. So you don't have a lot of flat areas, and most of the area, the topography is so steep, you cannot have land on those steep slopes. Actually, the government is trying to encourage the farmers to retain the cropland on steep slope to forest or grassland, because those areas cause a lot of problems, soil erosion and so on and so forth. Yeah, so that's the land limitation is a big issue.
That's actually a huge topic, is the whole countryside is being changed by this new style of rural urban centers. They want farmers to live away from land so that the government can use the land for development purposes. So there's a huge literature, huge struggle between farmers and the government, local governments. Another woman? Any other? Could you
Next
point that?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I already pointed.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I was wondering what relationship you might have with the Chengdu Panda Base and Panda Valley.
Yes. So Chengdu Panda Base that she's referring to is a breeding facility inside the city of Chengdu, which is about an hour and a half away from the Wolong Reserve. So we focus on the pandas in the wild, right? And because I think that's the most important part, because you can produce a lot of pandas in the facilities. That's important. But most importantly is to provide habitat for the pandas in the wild so that they can continue to reproduce, continue to expand the genetic pool so that they don't suffer in the long run. And I think that's very important. I see as a complementary effort, and we need both. And actually some of the pandas in the breeding site are released to the wild. And that's important too, because where to release the pandas? That's an important issue, because you don't want to release the pandas that will suffer, death or injury, right? You need to release the panda to a habitat area which is good for the panda with the minimum human impact. Also for them to easy to find the mate and easy for them to find the food and so on and so forth. I think that's a very important effort. Yeah. Thank you.
Have a question?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Do you also have a collaboration with Global Cause Foundation, or what is?
No, I have not have direct collaboration with them. So for me, actually, I have been trying to be more, quote unquote, more objective, right? Sometimes, the NGOs are wonderful. I think it's very important for conservation effort. Sometimes some NGOs have their own agenda, and that will sometimes compromise the objectiveness of as a scientist. So our main funding sources are from the National Science Foundation, from NASA, and those agencies which I think do not care what you find. They just want to, see the real results, and that's why we are so pleased with the confirmation by the government. Say, well, our results were accurate, even though we know, first we also doubt the results. We didn't blame them, and we didn't understand why it happened. That's why we think it's very important to integrate the social sciences and the policy into our ecological research. So I was trained as an ecologist, but I would say I'm not a traditional ecologist, and in the sense that the traditional ecologists focus on natural systems, but with human impact almost everywhere, directly or indirectly, we need to consider humans into it. And several decades ago, I began to do this, and my ecology colleagues laugh at me. So we have not done enough about how animals interact with the animals, how plants interact with the plants. If you including humans, you make things more complicated. I said, well, that's the reality that we are facing now. And we cannot pretend humans are not there. Actually, a lot of ecologists do experiment, trying to stay away from roads 200 meters away, and trying to be so-called natural areas. So I think it's very important to consider the human impact and the human attitudes and the behavior, their concerns, their intentions. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much for a panoramic talk. I'm curious, one of the successes, I think, of the development of the national park system here was the Civilian Conservation Corps and investing people with an interest in their own environment. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if there has been any thought about having the local residents work as conservationists. And secondly, you talked a lot about the impact of local residents, but not of potential tourism. So what would the impact of vastly increased tourism be on the environment?
Yeah, good questions. First, local participation is very important, because one of the things that we study is to understand their concerns, their needs, what they can do to help. And when we interview them, they're looking forward to interact with us, because we take what we find to the government agencies and say, well, those people have those concerns. And actually, as I told my students, we needed to take the perspective of local people. Just imagine we are the local farmers, what we would do. I said, I probably would do the same thing as they have been doing, because I needed to feed my family, and I needed to heat up the houses in the wintertime for my grandparents, right? What I do, if I don't have alternative energy source, I have to cut down the trees. Whether the trees, is part of the trees are part of the panda habitat or not. First, I have to survive. They're not living a luxury life. They are actually living a basic, life. And so that's a very important issue. The second issue is tourism. Yeah, tourism. Right. Tourism don't have direct impact in our area, but have indirect impact. As one of the slides I show, tourists buy the local products. So that encourages the local people to produce those products to meet the demand of tourists. So some of the products, including the smoked pork, made of pig pork meat, and then they needed those fuelwood to dry up those pork. So that cut down the trees, right, indirectly for tourism. And also tourism need facilities there, and the trails, and the other restaurants, hotels, and those kind of things. And also noise, actually, tourists bring a lot of noise there. One of the nature reserve had pandas there, but now with so many tourists, about 2 or 3 million tourists a year, you don't see any pandas there. Even though the bamboo, the habitat is wonderful, but you don't see any pandas there. So I think that's a very important issue. That's why we need to incorporate those external impact. That's why I say the meta-coupled, right? Not just the inside the system, but also outside, interaction with the outside system.
Okay, we have 3 more questions. We'll be done. Go ahead.
You mentioned that you used remote sensing.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could tell us more about what type of remote sensing, and if there's any mechanism for coupling the remote sensing data that's collected to some type of enforcement of, deforestation practices, something to support keeping the trees as opposed to allowing them to be illegally.
So we use all kinds of remote sensing data, from very high resolution, 1 meter in resolution, to 250 meters.
So is it satellite data? Or
Yeah,
is it, what is it exactly that you use?
Yeah, those actually CIA data, CIA declassified data, and that we were able to get those after the declassified data. Yeah.
So it's Landsat? Or
No, Landsat. Landsat is 30 meters, right? 30 meters inside in resolution. And then depending on the areas, depending on the purpose. If we want to narrow down an area, then we use higher resolution data. And if we want to do the larger areas, like nationwide, we also do nationwide analysis. We use 250 meter MODIS data. And and also we combine the field ground truth data, that we physically go there to see what's going on in the underground. But also we use Google Earth data to verify some of the images. So it's whatever we can get, whatever is useful, we use them.
And so is there any mechanism to couple the remote sensing data with policy?
Yes. A lot of actually, one of the things that we were able to convince the government is to show the remote sensing data results. See where those areas are deforested, they can see it, and then they went to the area, they can see those areas there, right? So I think that's very helpful, because you produce maps, colorful maps. You can see where the forest is still there, where the forest is gone, when the forest were gone, and then you can have this multi-temporal imageries and maps. You can see, really helpful, because a lot of government officials want to see visual images and then help them to understand the location, the specific location of those.
Second from last, you will have the last. Okay. Then we're done. Go ahead.
A small question.
Yeah.
In one of the graph you had, I think the drop of sustainable, I think it's maybe the number of pandas versus year before 2001. You showed there's an increase of population as well as the number of a household. You
increase the...
that's a science paper.
Okay.
Science paper.
Okay. So that means the habitat. I think.
Here's my question.
You
don't need to show.
Okay.
Now, what struck me was that the number of households as well as the population increase in that period is very high. I think you cited number 67% or something like that. Now, was that average for the whole population growth throughout the whole country, or just an area?
Those areas are mostly minorities. In China, people know one-child policy, right? So actually, minority people had the exemption from the one-child policy that the China implemented before. So they could still have 3 or 4 children. But even that, the number of households increased much faster than the number of people. And because of reasons like a divorce, and also young people move out of the household even before they get married, and the people live longer, And all those factors contributed to the, and even policy has a contribution to that too. And one of the policy is that the government is trying to provide incentives for the farmers. And then on a household basis, suddenly you see dramatic increase in new household. Why? Because if each household get $200, and if you divide your 4 members in the household into 2, then you get a double amount of the subsidies. So the policy actually stimulates the formation of a new household too.
Okay, you have the last question.
Thanks for the fantastic talk. I'm working on bird conservation in China.
Yeah.
And luckily, unfortunately, they're not as charismatic as giant panda, but we finally got the change in attitudes from the government. So my question is, because the starting of, to draw the attention from the government on conservation is just the first step. Do you have any insight in how to deal with the government to try to deliver the scientific findings to promote the design or management of those areas with those scientific findings?
Yeah, I think that's very important. And you were talking with me about the goal of the center, of the new center, China Center. So one is the evidence-based approach. I think that's critically important. And always make sure that your data are accurate, right? No matter what the government officials say, if you have your data to support you, in the end you will win. Okay, that's what happened to us, right? If we did not do that well, then probably we are not doing research on pandas anymore. We are continuing to do this now. Actually, we are expanding the real area to 19 provinces, including the whole historical range for the pandas. We're trying to understand how climate change will have impact on the future habitat for the pandas, because some of the area may getting worse, some of the area may getting better. So we need to find out that. I think that's number one. Secondly, you have a kind of respect, because the government officials also under a lot of stress. They don't have the freedom of pursuing knowledge. They have to listen to their boss. If the boss says something, they have to listen. Otherwise, they will, in deep trouble. So always respect them and take their perspective. What you would do if you are in that position, right? So I think that's important. Then they will be more willing to collaborate with you, to help you, if you take their perspective. And thirdly is patience. You got to be patient, because sometimes they have the priority. They're working on other things. Your issues are, very important to you. You may do a dissertation, but for them, they have other things their boss asks them to do. Some government officials have to keep their cell phone on 24 hours a day. Just in case some government officials, their boss asks them to do something, whether it's during the weekend or during the holidays or evenings, right? Because their boss have their boss. And one of our collaborators, we have long-term collaboration, 22 years now. And one time he was flying to Brazil. And because his flight get delayed, and then he had to make a stop in Alaska. And then he got a phone call from his organization asking him to return to the organization, right? Because the president, he was told the president of China is going to inspect his organization. Then he had to go back, right? So I ran into several occasions with him. We went to a lot of trips together. A lot of times on the way, before we reached the destination, he had to go back. So you have to understand those kind of constraints on the government officials too. So, yeah.
We treat our graduate students the same way.
I should introduce Yan Panda, Assistant Director of Center on Contemporary China, Philip Rush, Coordinator. I don't know if we have time for you tomorrow, but usually if you like to talk to the speaker, you can arrange a private meeting through Philip. So I don't know, are there any slots available tomorrow?
For tomorrow, there are some.
Okay, so if you would like to talk to Professor Liu, come to see Philip, and he will try to schedule a meeting. Thank you very much, Jack, for that.